The palace was quiet, too quiet. The usual hum of dragon wings, the low rumble of fire-heated halls, and the chatter of servants had all disappeared. Even the chandeliers hanging from the high ceilings seemed to dim, as if sensing the unease that filled the air. Velithra, the dragon queen, stood in the central hall, her massive shadow stretching over the polished marble floors. Her wings, usually vibrant and golden, drooped slightly, and her claws tapped lightly against the crystal railing. She stared at the cradle in the middle of the room, her twin heirs resting inside. The twins, Kaelin and Lyrian, were small for their age. Their scales had a faint shimmer, but they looked tired, pale and listless. They had not eaten for 7 cycles of the twin moons, ignoring every attempt by the palace cooks, the alchemists and even the royal healers. Silver dishes of golden nectar, crystal bowls of ancient fruit extracts, and elixirs mixed from dragon lore, all had been rejected. The twins simply turned away, their little claws clenching, their eyes wide with stubborn refusal. Velithra's heart ached. No mother, no queen should ever feel this helpless. She had commanded armies, negotiated peace with rival kingdoms, and survived battles that could destroy planets, but nothing in her life had prepared her for this. Every healer in the palace had whispered the unthinkable behind closed doors. If the twins continued to refuse sustenance, they might become weaker than the smallest mortal creature. And if that happened, the empire could lose them. Below the throne chambers, the palace corridors were empty except for one figure. A human named Aaron Hale moved quietly, pushing his cleaning cart along the stone floor. He was short by dragon standards, with scruffy brown hair and plain clothes that smelled faintly of soap and wax. No one paid much attention to him. Humans were rare in the Dragon Empire, and janitors even rarer. Aaron had spent years sweeping halls, polishing brass, and quietly fixing what no one else noticed. Today he had no idea that the fate of an entire empire rested not in the hands of generals or healers, but somewhere much closer to him. Aaron hummed softly, the sound bouncing off the tall stone walls. He had grown used to the silence in the upper corridors. Dragons rarely spoke to humans, and the few he had met were either too busy or too proud to notice him. He scrubbed a dark stain on the floor, rubbing it until it gleamed. And yet, today something felt different. The air above him seemed heavier, like a storm trapped inside a glass dome. Upstairs, Velithra lowered her massive head closer to the cradle. She whispered her children's names, a sound soft and gentle despite the power that radiated from her. Kaelin. Lyrian, her voice carried both command and pleading. The twins did not move. Their eyes were open, but they stared blankly at the ceiling. She knew that this was no ordinary hunger strike. Something deeper had taken hold. Fear? Sadness? Loneliness? She did not know, and that thought made her claws tighten. The healers entered, robes flowing and eyes anxious. Master Thalen, the chief healer, approached Velithra and bowed. Your Majesty, he said, voice careful, we have tried all the usual remedies. Herbs, elixirs, crystallized nutrients. Nothing works. Their energy is fading. Velithra's eyes flicked from the healers to the twins. Her mind raced. She had fought invaders, survived storms that could melt stone, and faced enemies that could turn entire planets to ash. But the stubborn refusal of her own children was something she could not fight with claws or fire. She needed a new idea, something unexpected, something human perhaps, because humans were unpredictable in ways dragons never imagined. Far below, Aaron moved the cart near the stairs leading to the throne chambers. He wiped the floor slowly, unaware of the glances from guards who passed by. He was small, unnoticed and ordinary. And yet, in that ordinary presence, there was something unmeasured and unseen, a quiet kind of courage that had survived years of being ignored. The twins shifted slightly, a tiny movement. Velithra's heart skipped. Any small sign of life was hope, though fragile. She leaned closer to the cradle. My little stars, she whispered. Eat, you must eat. Her voice trembled for the first time in centuries. Aaron paused mid-scrub, hearing the soft whimper from above. Curious, he tilted his head. Humans rarely got close to dragon nurseries, and even fewer were allowed near the royal cradle. But something about the sound made him stop and listen. He could not understand the language of dragons, but he could feel sadness, fear, and urgency. The tiny heartbeat of life in the cradle seemed to call out to him. Velithra stepped back, wings curling protectively around the cradle. She did not see Aaron yet. But the way he moved, quietly and without arrogance, caught the attention of Lyrian, the twin who had always been more curious. His shadow stretched along the floor like a small, moving creature, and Lyrian's tiny claws twitched. For a brief moment, the human seemed interesting rather than threatening. Aaron, still unaware of the royal eyes upon him, adjusted his cart and hummed another tune, this one softer, slower. The sound carried up the stairs, floating into the chamber. Lyrian turned her head slightly, staring at the rhythm of the human's movement. Kaelin followed, curious despite himself. For the first time in 7 cycles, the twins looked at something other than the emptiness above them. Velathra's eyes widened. Could a human, a simple janitor, draw her children's attention where dragons, healers, and magic had failed? She did not dare hope. But she watched as Lyrian's tongue flicked out, tasting the air, and Kaelin's wings twitched. They were alive. They were noticing. The palace remained silent, but in that silence, a small shift occurred. Life had returned in the smallest gestures, unnoticed by the royal guards and unmeasured by healers. A human, unaware of his own importance, had done something that centuries of dragon wisdom had failed to accomplish. And Velathra, for the first time, allowed herself to believe that perhaps the twins would eat again. Aaron finished his scrubbing, pushed his cart toward the next corridor, and hummed a final note. He did not know that he had begun to change the fate of the Dragon Empire. Far above, the twins' eyes lingered on the sound, their little bodies stretching just a fraction. The crystal cradle seemed to glow softly in response, as if recognizing life returning to those who had been lost to hunger. Velathra exhaled slowly, her chest rising and falling like a gentle storm. The first step had been taken. The twins were noticing the world again. And somewhere, hidden in plain sight, a human janitor had unknowingly become the bridge between life and despair. The palace alarms remained silent. But the empire had taken its first breath of hope. The palace was alive with tension. Velathra hovered near the cradle, her golden wings tense, casting long shadows across the marble floor. The healers whispered urgently to each other, their robes rustling as they carried trays of silver bowls filled with nutrient elixirs. The twins, Kaelin and Lyrian, lay on their soft crystal beds, eyes wide but uninterested, their claws idly brushing the air. 7 cycles had passed without a single bite. Every effort, every spell, every potion had failed. At that precise moment, Aaron Hale, the human janitor, was called into the chamber. Not by the queen herself, not by the healers, but by a misfired instruction from a junior servant. His cleaning cart had blocked the path of a healer carrying a tray of elixirs, and now he was standing in the chamber doorway, confused and out of place. His brown boots clicked lightly against the polished floor, and his hands gripped the wooden handles of his cart as he tried to make himself as small and unobtrusive as possible. The guards looked at him with suspicion. Humans were rare in the palace, and no human had ever been allowed this close to the royal nursery. They whispered warnings to each other, watching for any mistake. But Aaron only looked at the twins. He did not see weakness. He did not see sickness. He saw fear. He saw boredom. And for the first time he saw a chance to do something different. Velathra's eyes narrowed. Who was this human? A janitor could not save her children. That was impossible. And yet, the twins turned their heads slightly toward him. Their attention was no longer completely lost. Aaron's presence had disturbed the perfect stillness of their world, and for the first time, curiosity flickered in their eyes. Aaron took a deep breath. He had no training with dragons, no magical knowledge, no idea how to heal a royal creature. All he had was his imagination, his eyes, and a small skill in noticing what others overlooked. On his cart was a polished nutrient orb, one of the many dishes the healers had left behind. It gleamed under the chandeliers, a tiny sphere of golden light. Without thinking, Aaron gently nudged the orb across the floor. "Catch me if you can," he whispered softly, though not expecting the dragons to understand his words. He rolled it slowly at first, letting it wobble and slide, pretending it was trying to escape. Lyrian's eyes widened. The small orb moved as if alive. For 7 cycles nothing had been exciting. Nothing had been playful. Nothing had invited them to notice the world again. But now the orb rolled across the floor and her claws twitched. Slowly, carefully she reached forward. Her little claws tapped the floor as she nudged the orb back. Then she laughed, a soft trill-like sound. The sound was like music in the chamber, a sound that had not been heard for days. Kaelin blinked. At first he only watched, uncertain. Then, with a small grunt of determination, he stretched out a claw and tapped the orb, sending it rolling toward Lyrian. The two of them began to pass it back and forth, tiny claws brushing against the smooth surface. Their laughter echoed softly. Velathra's wings shivered in disbelief. No healer, no potion, no ancient spell had ever accomplished this. But a simple human game, a rolling orb across the floor, had captured the twins' attention. The court froze. Nobles, guards, and healers stood silently, unable to speak. They had all tried magic, ceremony, chants, and ritual. And yet here was a human janitor, an ordinary man who had simply used imagination and play to achieve what centuries of dragon wisdom had failed to do. Aaron glanced up, startled at the attention. He only smiled softly and rolled the orb again. Velithra could not take her eyes off the scene. Her children, weak and pale, were suddenly moving with energy, curiosity, and laughter. Their tiny wings twitched. Their eyes sparkled. The energy in the chamber shifted. What had been despair now carried a spark of hope. The twins' laughter grew louder. Lyrian attempted to jump slightly, missing the orb but catching Kaelin's attention. He grinned, or at least the dragon version of a grin, and nudged the orb harder. It rolled toward Aaron, who bent down and gave it a gentle push back. A simple game had begun. Each movement invited attention, focus, and participation. Each interaction reminded the twins that the world had more than empty rooms and bright, tasteless food. Velithra approached slowly, her massive claws careful not to crush the fragile crystal cradle. She observed every detail, the way the twins' tails twitched, the way their eyes followed the orb, the subtle rise in energy as their laughter grew. Something inside her shifted. Perhaps humans, so small and ordinary, understood things dragons had forgotten. Perhaps strength was not always measured in fire and claws. Perhaps it could be measured in simple curiosity, attention, and joy. Aaron noticed her approaching shadow and paused for a moment. He did not bow or shrink. He only smiled, letting the twins' game continue uninterrupted. His soft hums, the gentle nudging of the orb, and his calm human patience seemed to say more than any command or spell could. The chamber remained silent except for the rolling of the orb and the small, delighted sounds of the twins. Kaelin and Lyrian began to chase it, tapping it with their claws, batting it gently, and even trying to catch it mid-roll. They squealed and laughed. Each sound was a victory, a promise that life had not abandoned them. Velithra exhaled slowly, her chest rising and falling. The impossible had happened. A human had bridged the gap between despair and life, not with power, magic, or authority, but with imagination, play, and patience. The Dragon Queen realized that perhaps her empire needed more than just dragons. Perhaps it needed humans who could see the small, fragile joys that dragons overlooked. For the first time in 7 cycles, the twins opened their mouths willingly, not to taste an elixir or royal dish, but to nibble at the small nutrient orb as part of the game. Their laughter continued, mixing with small bites, a rhythm of life returning to the chamber. The court whispered in disbelief, guards lowered their tension, and healers smiled with cautious hope. Aaron continued to roll the orb, unaware that he had become the center of attention, unaware that his small human actions were reshaping the future. He had not planned this. He had only followed curiosity, noticing what dragons had ignored. Yet in doing so he had reminded everyone in the palace, queen, healers, and nobility alike, that life often responded to care, attention, and a little bit of imagination. Velithra watched, her golden eyes softening. Her children were not only alive, they were beginning to thrive. And somewhere in the simplicity of a human's game, she saw a future that promised more than survival. She saw hope, laughter, and the quiet strength of humanity touching the hearts of dragons. The news of the human janitor's success spread quickly through the palace halls. Every servant, guard, and noble who had witnessed the twins' laughter that day told the story, whispering it in hushed tones, afraid to attract the queen's displeasure yet unable to hide their amazement. A human, an ordinary, unnoticed janitor, had done what generations of healers, alchemists, and even the Dragon Queen herself had failed to do. Yet admiration was mixed with fear and distrust. By the next morning, the nobles had convened in the Grand Council chamber, their voices rising in disapproval. "This human is reckless," shouted Lord Varaxis, a tall dragon with scales like molten silver. "He has no rank, no training, and yet he dares to interfere with royal matters." Others nodded in agreement, muttering about the danger of letting an outsider influence the heirs of the Dragon Queen. Aaron meanwhile had returned to the twins. He was unaware of the rising tension in the council. To him the twins were not political symbols or heirs of a great empire, they were children. Small, frightened, and bored children who had forgotten how to live in a world that moved too fast for them. And like all children they needed encouragement, imagination, and attention, not orders or potions. He looked at the twins lying in their crystal cradle, tails flicking with restless energy. "All right, tiny star dragons," he said quietly, his voice calm and steady, "it's time to eat. But we're going to make it fun. He picked up a small spoon filled with the golden nutrient paste and held it up like a miniature torch. He tapped it lightly on the edge of the bowl and let it wobble toward the twins as if it were rolling across a tiny racetrack. Lyrian's eyes widened. Her mouth opened slightly, not in resistance this time but in curiosity. Kalen tilted his head and followed the spoon's path with a careful flick of his tongue. The twins had not eaten willingly in 7 cycles, but now Aaron had turned the act of eating into a game, a challenge and an adventure. "Let's see who can get the fuel first," Aaron said, tapping another spoon. "First one to taste it gets to roar the loudest." Lyrian's wings twitched in excitement, and Kalen's little claws stretched toward the moving spoon. Slowly, carefully, the twins took their first bites. The golden paste, which had been rejected so many times, now disappeared into eager mouths, accompanied by delighted squeals and laughter. Velithra watched silently from a distance, her massive wings folded around her like a shield. She did not interfere. She had seen humans in passing, heard of their cleverness, but never had she trusted one with the lives of her children. Yet here he was, moving calmly, creatively, and the twins were eating. Eating without force. Eating with joy. The Dragon Queen felt a warmth in her chest she had not felt in decades. The court, however, did not share her quiet awe. The nobles and healers continued to murmur. "This is dangerous," Lord Varaxis repeated. "He is teaching the twins to follow a human, not their own mother. Who knows what lessons he might instill?" Some muttered that Aaron might encourage disobedience or teach the twins to mock dragon traditions. Aaron, blissfully unaware of the arguments behind him, simply rolled a small dish toward Lyrian. "Catch it if you can," he said, laughing softly. The twin batted it with her tiny claw, sending it spinning toward Kalen. He nudged it back. The game continued, spoon races and bite counts mixing with soft laughter and clapping. Slowly, steadily, the twins began eating more than they had in 7 cycles combined. Their bodies, once weak and fragile, began to gain strength. Their scales brightened, their eyes sparkled, and their wings twitched with energy. For the first time, Velithra saw an idea she had never considered. Perhaps humans did not survive by strength, by power, or by fire. Perhaps they survived by understanding, by noticing the small needs that others overlooked. Aaron had no magic, no power, yet he had given life back to her children. He had done what dragons could not. By the 3rd day, the twins were eating with eagerness. Aaron introduced new games each meal. He counted bites with them, pretending that each spoonful was fuel for tiny star dragons. He encouraged them to race spoons down miniature tracks, to balance bites on their claws, and to pretend that every meal was a small adventure in a vast galaxy. The twins laughed, squealed, and even began sharing bites, a sign of growing trust and joy. Velithra observed quietly, amazed at the transformation. The twins' energy returned in ways no elixir or spell had managed. Their laughter echoed through the palace halls, soft but constant, a sound of hope that had been missing for far too long. Even the guards paused in their duties to listen, catching themselves smiling at the joyous noise. The nobles, however, continued their protests. They wrote urgent letters, summoned additional council meetings, and demanded that the queen intervene. "You cannot allow this human to influence the heirs," they insisted. But Velithra remained silent. She had watched the change in her children. They were stronger, healthier, and happier. She could see that life had returned to them not through force or authority, but through creativity, patience, and understanding. Aaron's human simplicity had revealed a truth dragons often forgot. Sometimes the smallest gestures mattered more than the greatest power. A laugh, a game, a moment of shared joy could achieve more than a spell, a command, or even centuries of wisdom. It was a lesson the court could not yet understand, but the Dragon Queen did. By the end of the week, the twins had gained weight, strength, and curiosity. They followed Aaron's games with enthusiasm, and sometimes they even tried creating their own, rolling food around the crystal floor and giggling when it escaped their tiny claws. Velithra finally allowed herself to exhale fully. Her children were no longer just surviving, they were living. And quietly, the Dragon Queen began to think of humans differently. Perhaps their true power was not in battles fought or planets conquered. Perhaps it was in understanding, in seeing what others missed, and in bringing life back to those who had almost given up. Aaron Hale, the ordinary janitor, had shown her a truth the Empire could never measure but could always feel. As the sun set over the palace, painting the golden halls with soft light, the twins finished their last spoonful of the day. They laughed, they played, and they curled into the cradle, safe, strong, and alive. Aaron watched, smiling quietly. He did not need praise, rank, or recognition. For him, the victory was simple: The twins were finally eating and life had returned to the heart of the Dragon Queen's palace. Vaelithra folded her wings around herself, silent but grateful. The court still doubted, the nobles still whispered, but one undeniable fact remained. The human had saved the twins not by strength, not by force, but by understanding. And perhaps that understanding would prove more powerful than any spell in the galaxy. The palace had barely begun to relax when news arrived. Scouts from the outer borders reported movement, strange ships, large and fast, appearing where no ships should have been. Panic rippled through the royal halls. The Empire's generals convened immediately, their claws tapping against stone tables, voices loud with urgency. Rumors of an invasion traveled faster than fire across the chambers. Vaelithra's gaze shifted automatically toward the crystal cradle. The twins, Kaelin and Lyrian, were curled together, napping lightly after a day of games and laughter. Their strength had returned, but the queen knew it was fragile. If fear returned to them, if they refused to eat again, the morale of the entire empire could collapse. Soldiers might hesitate, nobles might argue endlessly, and even neighboring kingdoms could take advantage of any sign of weakness. Aaron, oblivious to the council's tension, was already at work. He had stayed in the nursery through the day, observing the twins, teaching them new games and inventing ways to make eating fun. Now, as scouts reported the approaching ships, he simply continued his gentle hum and soft encouragement. He rolled a small golden orb across the floor, letting Lyrian chase it with her claws while Kaelin batted it back. "Careful," Aaron said quietly, bending closer to Kaelin. "This one's fast. But you're faster. Remember, little star dragons, the faster you move, the more fuel you get." Kaelin squealed, following the rolling orb with energy, and Lyrian laughed, swatting at it in delight. Vaelithra watched from a distance, wings folded tightly. She did not interfere, even when the council urged her to remove the human immediately. "This is no time for games," a noble shouted. "The Empire is in danger." But Vaelithra's eyes remained fixed on her children. She had seen what Aaron could do. Games had restored life where potions failed. Laughter had rebuilt energy where elixirs could not. And now, when the Empire faced a real threat, the human's presence was more important than ever. As night fell, Aaron did not rest. He sat on the crystal floor with the twins, inventing new games for each bite, each spoonful of food. He told soft, simple stories about tiny victories in distant lands, humans who shared meals, who helped each other, who overcame small hardships with patience and care. He did not boast, he did not lecture. He only told stories that reminded the twins of strength, hope, and the joy of small victories. Kaelin and Lyrian listened intently, their tails twitching, eyes wide. They ate more than they had in days, laughed at small mistakes, and tried new ways to play with the nutrient spheres. When one sphere rolled too far, they chased it together, careful not to let it fall. Slowly, steadily they gained energy, their wings stretching, their claws steady. They had learned to trust, to bond, and to enjoy the moment. In the council chambers, nobles whispered nervously. "Why is a human allowed to stay?" one asked. "He is only a janitor." Another shook his head. "And yet, the children are stronger. They are calm. Perhaps he has done something we cannot measure." Aaron did not measure. He only noticed the twins' reactions. When Kaelin clumsily dropped a spoon, Aaron laughed softly and helped him pick it up, pretending it was a treasure recovered from a distant star. When Lyrian giggled at the wobbling orb, he nodded and said, "Well done, tiny star dragons. You are learning faster than I expected." Time passed slowly, but the twins' energy continued to grow. The Empire's soldiers watched with amazement as the twins' laughter echoed through the palace halls. Something had changed. Something subtle but powerful. The children's vitality inspired confidence, even among those who did not understand the human's methods. The Empire's strength was not in weapons alone, it was in the hope and energy of its future rulers. By dawn, the scouts returned with reports. The strange ships had moved on. They had not attacked. Their sensors had detected the Empire's readiness, but also something they could not calculate: unity, life, and determination. Confused by the apparent energy and focus of the palace, the enemy withdrew. They did not fire. They did not challenge. They simply vanished into the distance, leaving the Empire intact. Vaelithra exhaled slowly, her massive chest rising and falling. The palace had survived. The Empire had survived. And as she looked at Aaron sitting quietly with her children, she realized the truth. The human janitor had done more than feed two twins. He had stabilized the heart of the Empire. He had reminded dragons, healers, and nobles alike that life, hope, and unity were as essential to survival as claws and fire. Kaelin yawned and curled against Lyrian, the twins' tiny wings stretching as they settled into the cradle. Lyrian whispered softly, a sound too small for humans to understand, but full of contentment. Aaron smiled, brushing a small hand along the edge of the cradle. He did not claim victory. He did not demand recognition. He simply watched them sleep, knowing he had given them more than food. He had given them trust, attention, and care. Velithra approached slowly. She rested her head near the twins, careful not to disturb them. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel peace. She did not need to understand the humans' methods fully. It was enough to know that they worked and that her children were thriving. The court, witnessing the calm after the storm, could not deny it. The human had done what no dragon, no noble, no healer could do. He had steadied the children, and in doing so he had steadied the empire. Every guard, every advisor, every dragon in the palace felt it, even if they could not articulate why. The laughter and calm of two small twins had carried more power than any army. Aaron remained quiet through the night, telling stories, inventing games, and watching the twins grow stronger. His human patience and creativity had prevented disaster. When the first light of the new day entered the palace, Kaelin and Lyrian had eaten well, slept soundly, and bonded closer than ever. Their energy radiated through the halls like sunlight, warming even the coldest chambers. Velithra looked around her, golden eyes softening. She realized that sometimes, the smallest and most ordinary beings could change the course of history. A human janitor with no rank, no magic, no power, had saved more than just her children. He had saved the empire, the heart of the kingdom, and perhaps even the future of the galaxy. And in the quiet moments that followed, the palace was alive not with fear, but with hope. The twins slept peacefully. Aaron remained close, quietly observing. Velithra folded her wings around them protectively. The empire's boundaries were safe, the enemy had left, and one small human had shown the true power of understanding, care, and attention. The palace was quiet in the early morning, golden light spilling across the marble floors and sparkling off the crystal cradle. Kaelin and Lyrian slept soundly, their tiny bodies warm and strong, their wings resting gently on their backs. Aaron Hale, the human janitor, sat nearby on a low stool, polishing a small tray while humming softly. The palace felt alive in a way it hadn't for weeks. Laughter, trust, and quiet strength filled the halls, all because of him. Velithra entered the nursery quietly, her massive wings folding around her as she observed the peaceful scene. The twins stirred, blinking sleepily, and smiled when they saw Aaron. He had become more than a janitor to them. He was a companion, a teacher, and a guardian of their joy. Every bite they took, every small laugh, every playful chase of a nutrient orb had built a bridge between fear and life. The Dragon Queen, still awed by what he had done, knew it was time to recognize him properly. The nobles had whispered their objections for days, demanding that a human not influence the heirs. But Velithra had seen the truth. Aaron had saved her children. He had given them life, laughter, and curiosity again. That was worth more than gold, more than rank, and more than power. Aaron was called to the royal hall. He walked through the corridors, pushing his small cleaning cart, unaware of the attention he received. Nobles bowed stiffly, generals whispered, and guards straightened nervously. He did not understand their expressions. He had never sought glory, never sought recognition. He had only wanted to help the twins. Velithra awaited him in the center of the hall. Her golden eyes shone with calm authority. "Aaron Hale," she said, her voice deep and resonant, "you have done what no dragon, no healer, and no magic could achieve. You have restored my children's life, laughter, and strength. For this I offer you wealth, titles, and power beyond imagining." Aaron blinked. Gold, titles, power, these words were strange to him. He thought of the coins that jingled in distant markets, of halls filled with nobles he barely knew, of privileges he could not imagine. And yet he shook his head gently. "Your Majesty," he said softly, "I do not want gold. I do not want titles. I do not want power. I only wish to keep my job, and to continue my games with the twins. That is enough for me." A hush fell across the hall. Nobles whispered in disbelief. Generals looked at each other, astonished. They could not understand how someone would refuse riches and authority. But Velithra understood. She had seen the human strength, his patience, his quiet ability to notice what others missed. This was not weakness. It was power, the kind that could not be stolen or measured by scales or fire. The Dragon Queen's gaze softened. "Very well," she said, her voice calm yet firm. "You shall keep your job. You shall continue your meal games, your stories, your care. And I grant you something far greater than gold or titles. My protection and my voice. You will speak and you will be heard. You will remain here, safe, and no one shall challenge your place with my children." Aaron's eyes widened. Protection and voice? He had never thought about needing recognition. He only wanted to help. And yet, in that moment he realized that the Dragon Queen's trust and support were more valuable than any treasure he could imagine. Over the next cycles, the story of Aaron Hale spread across the Empire and beyond. Dragons in distant kingdoms spoke in awe of the human who had restored life to royal heirs without fire, without force, without war. Nobles told the tale to their peers, soldiers recounted it during patrols, and healers whispered it in awe. The story traveled further, carried by traders, travelers, and curious humans who had come to see the Empire. But it was not the dragons who became the heroes of this story. It was the human who had cared when no one else could. He had used patience instead of power, games instead of force, and attention instead of magic. He had done what dragons, proud and strong though they were, could not do on their own. He had reminded them of the simplest and most important truths of life. Kaelin and Lyrian continued to grow stronger each day. They played, they laughed, and they ate with joy, their little claws carefully balancing spoons, chasing nutrient orbs, and listening to soft stories about distant lands and tiny victories. The palace was alive with energy and curiosity again, and the twins' laughter reached even the farthest halls, spreading hope to those who heard it. Vaelithra observed quietly, proud yet humbled. She had ruled with strength for centuries, defended the Empire against countless enemies, and led her people with fire and authority. But she realized now that the true power of an empire was not in its weapons or its magic. It was in understanding, in care, in the quiet acts of kindness that restored hope and life. The human sat with the twins, telling a story about a small star that had traveled far across the galaxy to find a lost friend. Kaelin giggled, Lyrian squealed, and the orb rolled again across the floor. Aaron laughed softly. He had no idea that his simple acts, games, stories, gentle encouragement, were being remembered beyond the palace walls. And far above, in the endless galaxy, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter. The story of Aaron Hale spread across systems and worlds, reaching those who valued courage, care, and creativity. It was a story not of battles won or empires conquered, but of a human who had saved an empire without weapons, without titles, without gold. Just understanding, attention, and compassion. The Dragon Queen folded her wings around the twins and Aaron, her golden eyes softening. She knew that the Empire's strength had been renewed, not by magic or power, but by something quieter and far more lasting, humanity. She allowed herself a rare smile, feeling hope settle deeply in her heart. And quietly the stars remembered. They remembered a simple truth, one that Aaron himself had never sought to teach, that humanity survives, thrives, and endures not by ruling others, not by commanding or conquering, but by caring when no one else knows how. When attention, patience, and love are given freely, even the smallest beings can change the course of history, steady an empire, and leave a mark on the universe. Aaron looked at the twins one last time that evening, smiling softly as they fell asleep after their playful meal. The palace was quiet once more, but it was a quiet filled with life, trust, and hope. The Empire had survived, stronger than ever, not because of fire or claws, but because of a human who noticed what dragons could not. And somewhere across the galaxy, in the silent light of the stars, that small ordinary human, and his games, would be remembered forever.